Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Jessica, and today I have Kimberly with me to talk about ancestral healing. Kimberly responded to one of my question posts on social media about ancestral healing, and we had quite an intriguing conversation, which resulted in me inviting you, Kimberly, to join us on the podcast for this podcast series. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more and share about your experiences with ancestral healing, and so that we can get to know you better and share our wisdom about this topic.
Okay, well, thank you, Jessica, for having me here, and I would love to share. Let's see. So I have been really working on ancestral healing probably for the past 6.5 years of my life, and I had a lot to work on, and I feel like I'm the chosen one in my lineage to heal and I feel like all of the ancestors are like, she's the one, and I spent a lot of years, many of my childhood and adult years, in trauma and suffering, and resulted in some addictions, and thinking that, when I was younger, I wanted to write a book about being the last link of the abuse that was in my family line, and it was called The Last Link. And but the problem with that book was that I was still abusing myself. So I wasn't abusing anybody else. I had children, I didn't abuse them. I had a stepchild, I didn't abuse him. Then these were things that I had gone through in my own childhood, where there was so much trauma. And so I thought, well, look at me, I'm a good mother, and I'm a good person, and I'm a good steward of taking care of other people and helping other people, and I don't do what was done to me, but I was doing what was done to me to myself.
I imagine that some listeners, and myself included, are like, oh yeah, that sounds so familiar, right? And what a crucial step in recognition in the healing process, right? The first step is like, I'm not going to do this to anyone else. What was done to me, that's the first step. And then, but wait a second, I'm still doing this to myself. And that's a really powerful moment, because, what I've noticed in that regard for myself is that if I'm still doing those things to myself, even if I'm not overtly or in the big dramatic ways doing it to others, that energy may be slipping out, and it may be creating a subtler version of that abuse with other people as well, because I'm not able to give from an overflowing cup of self-love. So we might be able to, so we get to a subtler layer of the healing when we recognize, okay, yeah, I'm not doing those big dramatic things anymore. Thank goodness. Phew, celebrate, hallelujah, right? Okay, what are the more subtle layers of it? How am I doing this to myself? How is that still affecting my relationships? And if I heal that in myself and stop doing that to myself, what kind of even better relationships with my loved ones could I even have and grow into, right? And so, yeah, and I've been, discovering that layer upon layer upon layer myself as well. And, the abuse that I underwent was more witnessing the overt abuse of my mother at the hands of my stepfather, but also how they abused each other with verbal abuse and, codependent relationship and all of that. So it was already kind of in a more subtle level. Like I wasn't physically abused or neglected. It was more on the emotional abuse level of things. And that had been the case for many generations, although I think my great grandmother had possibly suffered more physical abuse, and had to like escape out the window in the middle of the night with my grandmother and my aunt, in order to get away from that kind of abuse, on fear of her life, being in danger, and had to go and get family assistance and say he's going to kill us, in order to be hidden for several months. So my sense of it is that she was experiencing some kind of physical abuse as well. But that emotional abuse thing has been a thread throughout. And that can get quite subtle and hard to tell too, because there's the overt verbal, abusive, emotional stuff. And then there's the subtle emotional abuse. Like oftentimes the person who's in the more victim role with that overt stuff is doing subtle, passive aggressive kind of abusive stuff just to maintain or sustain their own, any semblance of power in the dynamic, right? So we could go on and on talking about all the dynamics of subtle and more gross abuse, but the truth is, the healing process, we have to go and sort through all of that and like witness ourselves repeating, subtle, more and more subtle patterns with ourselves and like that. And so I'm just curious if you'd be willing to share some, and here we are talking about very general, if there's anything that it feels safe and okay to share any specific stories about how you perhaps even more recently have discovered that, wow, this situation is me doing the same thing to myself as was done to me as a child, and how you recognize that and how you've started to make progress on shifting that for yourself. Because I'm imagining that you're, in that awareness, it's like, oh gosh, maybe I don't want to keep doing this.
Well, I'll go back a little. I'll go just a little bit of family history. Let's see where to begin. I can go back as far as probably my birth mother, who the story is, well, not the story, the truth is that she passed away when I was about 2 or 2.5 years old. And so I, grew up without her, of course, and always kind of, when I got older, wondered about her and hoped that that was a lie, that she didn't pass, hoped that she was going to find me someday, or some silly fairy tale. But truth is, she was always with me. She, I think, was a very strong identity in my life that helped me through a lot of things that I went through after she passed, from the other side. I've always believed in angels, and used to say the quote, I termed this quote angel energy, and I didn't know where that came from. I figured it was her, and I think that's why I termed it back in, in my teens, or late teens, or 18s, or something like that. But so she had passed, and then nobody talked about her passing, though. As I got older, nobody talked about her. And then my dad, I was raised by my grandmother and my grandfather. She was actually a step grandmother, but very much a grandmother to me for years, until my dad could take me on his own. And he did. And he remarried and had, he had challenges, because going back to beyond my mother, their mother was abusive, and she had a history of alcoholism, and she pretty much spewed the alcohol wrath onto her children. That sounds very vicious, but I think that's what happens, And for her, in the stories I've heard, there was some really hard times, never talked about, everybody just smoothed it over, because I think back in the day we didn't talk about these things, and I'm all about talking about it now. I'm like, let's get it out, let's look at it, let's heal it, let's work it. I feel like emotional in my chest right now, because it's a lot for one person to carry, and I didn't even realize I was carrying it. I thought I thought that I had this problem with alcohol. I had this problem with addiction. And then when I when I look back, I also see that my mother suffered from addiction when she was in her 18s. I don't really know when hers started. As a result, I think it was her way of trying to self-medicate, self-nurture through the trauma she faced. My dad, he had some bouts with alcohol, but as far as I'm concerned, he didn't. I don't want to say that he hadn't. He was an alcoholic, but he definitely, there was lots of parties. They like to have their drinks and whatnot. Grew up eventually, and I kind of followed in that footstep, and I did some things in my 20s or 18s. I keep referencing 18 because I moved out when I was 18, so there's a lot of stuff I did. And I found out that my mom did those same things. And I found out that, a career that I took on, that my mom took on that career. I found out a drug that I really got into was the same drug that my mother had done. And that was just weird to me, but I was just like, wow, like that's just, bizarre. But as I've stopped drinking now. For my drug of choice for a very long time was alcohol. And I stopped drinking 5 years and 7 months ago. So there's where the healing began, was to stop that. And that was a challenge in itself, but I knew that I was a good mom, but I could be better. I feel like I'm going all over the place with this, but anyway, so back to, it seems that if we don't heal, if we don't face the stuff that's been traumatizing ourselves and our family, then we're never healing it. And we're walking around and we're just living this life reacting to everything that happens to you. And you don't even realize why you get totally emotional, or why you get angry, or why you get mad, or why you lash out. And you don't realize all of these things it's not that little simple thing that happened to your life, like somebody was driving aggressively behind you or something, and you're like, and you kind of want to lose it. There's so much more to that. There's so much more to every human being than just the little matters at hand. And there's the ancestral healing that needs to be done for all of us. And I guess my healing was stopping the drinking, but then through looking at my past and looking at my mother and looking at my father, my grandmother, my grandfather, and looking at the lack of sharing this very important information. My dad still never shared with me that my mom did these drugs. He still, to his dying day, he never once admitted it, and I was like, Dad, I know that she did. My grandmother told me. And he's like, oh, really? Because he didn't want to give me an excuse to say, well, she did it, so I'm going to do it. So everything was just hushed and pushed under the rug, I guess. And for me, I don't push anything under the rug anymore. I need to clean, so some things are sometimes pushed under the rug that way. But when it comes to the emotions, and I have a teenager now. I have a stepson who is 27, and he's 28, and I have a 17-year-old daughter who I've raised on my own. And I do not shy away from this stuff. And I share with her, and she was part of my recovery. I shared with her, and she knows about this. She knows about my lineage, and I share. And through a lot of the things that I've done, of course, my stopping drinking was the first point in any kind of recovery and any kind of being able to look and reflect back on the past and stuff. But it's just the trauma just has been recreated. My birth mother passed when she was 2, and her birth mother passed. My birth mother passed when I was 2 or 2.5, something like that. And her birth mother passed when she was 2 months old. And so she grew up without a mother. And so her father remarried a woman who I mentioned before, who was my grandmother, who, back in those days, they all were drinking, at least in my family lineage, and she should not have been a mother. She just didn't know what she was doing. Alcohol, I know the disease well. So I carried on through my life the thought that maybe I was abandoned and that my mother didn't want me. And she chose her addiction over me. And it wasn't until I got sober, and it was a couple of years later on Mother's Day when I was laying in bed, and I actually said, Happy Mother's Day to my birth mother, whose name is Diane. And I told her I loved her, and I started crying because I think that was the first time I'd ever said that. And then all of a sudden I realized, I was like, I'm sorry for what you've gone through. And I came to the realization that she didn't make the choice. She didn't say she wanted the alcohol or the drug, hers was drugs, over me. It was that the disease took her. The disease took her completely, and she could not make the choice. It was so rampant in her body, and I only know it because I know it, and now I was sober, and I was like, oh my gosh, you went through what I went through. I went through the same thing exact as you. And here I've been struggling all these years to get to want to be sober for my child, for me, but for my child, because I knew there was a missing piece of my motherhood, that I could be so much better if I just stopped drinking. So much better. I'm like 90%, but I could reach that 10% if I could just cut the alcohol out of my body, out of my life. And I realized that my mom was trying to do the same thing, and she couldn't. And then that just gave me, I started, crying even more, because I was like, I forgive you. I forgive you, and please forgive me. And then that was just, a huge moment in my life to realize that, the things that our families have done, a lot of the stuff that I've suffered from, as a result of her being gone and other things that happened in my life, that each person that's played this role in my life and my childhood, they weren't intending to go out and try to hurt me or each other. They just were copying and repeating and following the same things that had been done to them.
Such a powerful realization, and some of the things that are standing out to me in what you're sharing about are also things that I've experienced, in that whatever's happening biochemically in our parents, when they come together and conceive us, affects our development at a fundamental cellular level. So when parents are young, partying, doing drugs, doing alcohol, having sex, getting pregnant, continuing on with drugs and alcohol throughout the pregnancy, birth, and child rearing process, that affects our development biochemically.
Yeah.
How can it not? So it's only been in more recent years that the medical professionals have said, maybe not best to drink alcohol and do drugs when you're pregnant. And it takes, first of all, it takes at least 17 years for medical research like that says that comes to that conclusion. It takes 17 to 19 years for that to become common knowledge amongst medical professionals.
Wow.
So there can be research that says that, and it takes almost 2 decades for all the doctors to start repeating that information to their patients. Right. And in a culture where we all have been trained over many generations to look to our doctors for health guidance instead of having any kind of intrinsic awareness of our own or having, shared awareness about health. No, we've all been trained for many generations that the doctors are the authorities on our health and well-being, right? And so we wait those several decades just doing whatever. And then if you look at media, if you look at movies, even today, modern films depict the heroes and heroines for fun, for relaxation, for recreation. What are they doing? They're drinking alcohol.
Yeah. And And or other substances. Yeah.
And when they're stressed out, what do they say? I need a drink.
Yeah.
There's no other way of depicting people de-stressing except in sort of a derogatory way, oftentimes, where characters will be portrayed doing meditation or yoga or other things that are well known, scientifically shown to be much more beneficial for our health and for de-stressing, right? But in media, which is a big influence on us, it's often depicted in derogatory ways.
Yeah.
Whereas alcohol is just the go-to. So even though we have this understanding and scientific understanding of the detrimental effects of alcohol and addiction for many generations now, our media still portrays it as a natural part of life, of the way that you de-stress and the way that
they
you
romanticize it. Yeah,
and it's romanticized. Yeah, no, please, I'm sure you have lots to say about this. and so, it's understandable that, okay, our parents were doing this while we were developing as tiny, very absorptive, very influential beings that were designed to absorb information from our parents' biology about what our life is going to be. And that is designed to influence how our DNA develops our bodies. So if our little developing embryo self is receiving all of this information and bathing in alcohol and the byproducts of alcohol and the biochemical reactions that are happening in our mother's body because of alcohol and other drugs, then our DNA is going to create a body that thrives in that environment.
Aha.
And so then we grow up, and as soon as we can get a drink, we're going to get one.
Yeah. That's right on the money right there. And, they don't show the movies where after work, after a stressful day at work at the office, they go to yoga class or Tai Chi or meditation. Yeah, they're like, hey, let's go have drinks. And it ends up in a terrible, crazy, wild night,
And that this is supposed to alleviate the stress. But
right.
No, it doesn't. The person shows up to work less capable the next day.
And that's where the vicious cycle can be.
Exactly. And so it's understandable because it's just reinforced on all sides that this is the only avenue that you have. Luckily, people like yourself and myself somehow came in contact at some point with alternatives and woke up to the fact that these methods didn't work. It didn't alleviate anybody's stress. It didn't make anybody any healthier and happier. In fact, it did the exact opposite. It was so blaringly obvious at a certain point that, that at a certain point I was like, not going to do this anymore. I mean, I somehow I avoided having there's a particular genetic thing that happens in a way that the pancreas develops, for example. I can't remember the exact details of it, but there's a certain way that your body develops if your parents are alcoholic. And my mom wasn't necessarily alcoholic, but my biological dad was definitely alcoholic. So I could have developed that genetic preponderance where there's a way that your body reacts when you've started to have too much alcohol, where you become averse to it, where you just won't drink anymore because it's disgusting to you. I had that, whereas oftentimes people who are children of alcoholics, they don't develop that. They want to drink more.
Mm-hmm.
They never have that aversion to alcohol get triggered when they've had a certain amount. So luckily I could have become an alcoholic, but luckily I had that gene or that quality where it became aversive to me. And not only on any given episode of drinking, because I did drink alcohol, experiment with alcohol as a young woman, and would become averse. But it only took me one time of drinking to the point of vomiting to realize that why would I want to do this to myself?
Lucky you.
Yes, I feel very fortunate that somehow some ancestral part of my ancestral lineage and that my mom didn't become an alcoholic in that sense. She wasn't, there wasn't that kind of strength of the alcoholic lineage, although my biological father was, so there could have been, but I didn't inherit that gene somehow. I didn't inherit that quality that makes you lose your aversion to alcohol. But that's the thing, is that there is that gene, there is that biochemical, organ development thing that you can inherit from alcoholic parents, that you don't have any aversion to it. In fact, you just want more.
Yeah.
And that is so difficult to overcome, because when you are stressed or whatever, you just, and all those influences we talked about, you just want that. And so I'm not really speaking from experience. I'm speaking from what I've observed and what I've learned about it, because I've been curious about it, for healing my own lineage. And so I'm curious what was it that, was there a moment or a situation where you said, wait a second, I cannot keep doing this. I need to stop doing this. And what was it that helped you to really stop?
Well, yeah, there was a lot of moments where I would say I wanted to stop, and I would recite out loud that I wasn't Mommy's not going to buy wine anymore. And then we'd go to the grocery store hours later. And of course I'd be looking at the wine section, and my child, would say, Mom, you said you weren't going to. And it's kind of heartbreaking to, bring up that memory, because, I promised that I wouldn't. And then, and she knew how whatever. There's a lot, not whatever. There's, I guess, some regret, and I wish that wasn't my state of being in the past, but it was. And, I'm going to answer your question, but before I do, I want to touch on something you said, and that's about you not having the aversion to not, repeat the alcohol tendencies of your father or anyone in your lineage. I said to you, gosh, you were the lucky one. And I do 100% believe you were. And when I was going through my stages where I really wanted to quit, but I just couldn't, I remember thinking, God, is there, and I've heard that there's a pill you could take that would make you sick if you were to drink alcohol on it. I thought, well, that's the magic pill. And if I take that pill, then I'll get sick. But then I thought, well, why would I want to take the pill? Because I could see myself getting these pills for whatever they cost. And I think they're quite expensive, but that at any point it would be worth it to stop drinking. But then I never looked into it. And years and years later, I think, I'm so glad I didn't, because all of those things that I had to go through have made me who I am. And now I have medicine, behind me and within me to be able to help others and to share my story. And just the same thing with the traumas of my past and the childhood traumas and all of that stuff. Like, it's not like I would go up to anybody who I felt hurt from and say, oh, thank you so much for doing what you did to me, because now I'm such a great person. But I feel thankful that, in a weird way, I feel thankful that I have those experiences now, because I really admire and I like who I am today. And I know that I'm put here on this planet to share my story. And we're all put here to share our facets and our our gifts. And I feel like all of that stuff now is a gift for me to be able to help others who have gone through this stuff. And then you asked about what the moment was. The final moment for me, I just had been drinking all weekend, and my daughter was at her father's. That's normally when I would drink, a lot. And I just was sicker than a dog from consuming so much alcohol. And I just was feeling horrible. And I was supposed to go get my daughter the next day at her father's. And I was just down. And I envisioned a way to end my life. I envisioned like what I could do to like get myself out of it, because I didn't know how to get out of it on my own. And I've never been, suicidal or anything like that. And I guess I suffered from some depression, but I drank through that. So it made me feel better for a moment anyway. But this day was different than all the other days. And I got myself up and I got myself in the shower, and I was feeling weak and sick, and just I got down on the floor of the bathtub and I was begging for help. And I reached out to my higher power, I call God, but I reached out to just reached out to anybody who would listen, anybody above in the heavens that could help me get through this, because I surrendered and said I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it alone. I can't. I've tried and I can't. So I am willing to do whatever it is I have to do to be sober. So use me. Use me. I am your child. I am surrendering. I am down on the ground. This is my weakest point that I've ever been in, and I don't ever want to be here again. And please, dear God, help me. And eventually I cried my eyes out and got up, and I don't know what I did the rest of the day, went to bed. I certainly didn't drink anymore. And the next day I got up and I, got myself together, and I went to get my daughter, and I told her, I took her to I live in Ojai, California, and I took her down to a beautiful spot in the river bottom, and just told her that I was going to do everything I could do to stop drinking. And I apologized for the years of drinking that I had been doing. And I said, I'm going to get a sponsor. I went through a program, it's AA. And I said, I'm going to sponsor, and I'm going to go to meetings, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to live it. I'm everything I can do to not drink again. I'm hoping this is my last day of ever drinking. And I looked at her and said, do you have anything to say? She was crying. I was crying. And she just gave me a big hug and told me she loved me. And so here I am, 5 years and 7 months sober. And I've done a lot of healing through that, doing step work, but then also like energy work. And I was already sober when I started getting into energy work, and I was and I forgot to mention, the obsession was lifted. The obsession was lifted. I went to my meetings. I did get a sponsor. I poured myself heavy into doing that, but and doing the step work looks at your past and what things you've done, what you've experienced, and then I did another step work in another program, which is called ACA. It's Adult Children of Alcoholics or Other Dysfunctional Families. Mm-hmm. Well, I qualified in that one. That actually helped me more than the AA did, because I was looking at what had happened to me. Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, no wonder you were drinking. Like, were you an alcoholic, or were you just, so traumatized that what was really your diagnosis? And I'm sure both. But one helped the other, or at least I thought it did. And then, through doing all of that, I eventually started into, I learned about Reiki, and I learned about meditation, and I knew about meditation, but I'd never done it. And, these things which really helped with my peace of mind, and helped me when you have that angst and that stress, and as we mentioned before, instead of going and hitting a bottle of wine or going to a bar or a liquor store or whatever, it would be to go for a walk in nature and appreciate the beauty of nature, or put my feet in the earth and appreciate Mother Earth underneath me, and meditate, as well as, I got into, like I said, Reiki and sound healing, and and other crystal healing and other modalities such as that, which really have helped. And as a result, I decided to study those things, and they've helped me immensely, changed my life.
Right. So you were sharing with me that you went and studied, now you're a Reiki practitioner. Is that right?
I am, yes.
Beautiful. So before we talk more about that, though, I want to back up because you mentioned a couple of things that I want to, if it's okay, if we take a little bit more time to look at that. You mentioned telling your daughter that you weren't going to get wine anymore. And then there you were a couple hours later at the grocery store in the wine aisle looking for wine. And your daughter saying, I thought you weren't going to get wine. And I'm curious if since becoming sober, if you have done any healing around that unreliability with your daughter. And I imagine you have, because I'm familiar with the step work that you're talking about. Could you share a little bit about that? Because I'm sure that was a source of pain for you, and looking back on that with your daughter, and that it was probably reminded you of situations in your childhood where you would be promised something by your alcoholic parents only to have them fail to deliver on that promise again and again and again. And that kind of parent-child dynamic is, although it's not overtly abusive, it's one of these more subtle layers where the child grows up not knowing who they can rely on. And which is a great source of anxiety, because you don't know if you can't count on your caregivers, who can you count on? And where do you belong? And so there's this sort of, every time that happens as a child growing up, there's like the rug being pulled out from underneath us. Then we're casting about for some kind of security. And that makes it very easy to rely on something like the booze bottle, because you can always rely on that one making you feel better, right? That one's always there for you, right? It always does the same thing for you. And since your parents weren't reliable, the ones you were supposed to be able to rely on, well, then who were they relying on? The bottle. Okay. So this is one of these, another, perhaps subtle layer, but actually quite profound. And I'm curious how you addressed this with your daughter, and how you addressed that, how that pattern of not being able to rely on each other, not being able to trust the word of your loved ones, for example, perhaps that translated that experience. You received that experience, I imagine, from your parents, and there you were doing that with your daughter. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, first I can. I have two things. One of them was, how do I share with my daughter about that now? I think just having an open relationship and talking about it and not shying away from those discussions. And of course, huge apologies, in the first, I don't even know how many years, I bawled all the time, because I would think about experiences where I wasn't as present as I should have been. And I would just, cry and apologize profusely. And my poor kid's like, okay, Mom, she would, but as years have gone on, I really do believe it's an open communication. It's talking, and we've talked about it. And of course the apology, but then comes the action, and her seeing me not doing it anymore is huge. Her seeing me reach out into these healing classes, her seeing me go all these days and years now without touching alcohol, and her seeing me stressed out and still being faithful and true to my word, and that I am not drinking anymore, and her seeing me not have a desire to. So her seeing me when I'm feeling, and she's, because I'm a single mother, she lives with me. She's with her father every other weekend, most of the time. But, so she's here all during the week and weekends for most of the part. And so she's I guess she's like my right-hand man in a sense. Like we're right there next to each other all the time. And so she knows we know each other very well, and she knows when I'm at my max, and I know when she's at hers. And the fact that I'm like, okay, let's go for a walk. What can we do? And if she's feeling trauma or if she's feeling anything, which, she's gone through her own bouts in her life with some anxiety and whatnot. And so I was like, okay, let's get you a counselor, because I can talk to her and I can share a bunch of things, but she might have some stuff from me, and it wouldn't be surprising if she does, or her father, or who knows, that maybe she doesn't want to talk to me about. Maybe she needs to share it with a professional.
Mhm.
So she knows, and it's helped her. And and I'm really thankful that when I saw the signs, that I said, okay, let's go and see what we can do. That when I was a child and counseling was mentioned, I would go to the counselor and be in fear, because I was prompted not to say anything about certain things that had happened in the household. So, I'd go in like stiff and like, and they'd ask me questions, and I'd be very like court with them and answer yes and no questions. And because I couldn't share, because I knew I'd get retaliated against when I got home. So for me to go, okay, let's do this. So that's part of it. And I wanted to mention about something you said, just to clear something up. When you said about the alcoholic parents in my family, yes, I think my mother was addicted. Well, I know she was. And my father did his drinking. I still don't want to say he was an alcoholic. He definitely liked the party, and they had several of them and whatnot. And but I just wanted to kind of clear that. I don't want that information to be out there that he was, because I don't. He wasn't where I was at. He did have his fun with it. I don't know what to call what he did, but I can own my own.
Right.
But yeah. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just clarify that I was talking about our, in general, alcoholic parents.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't say our alcoholic mothers, because my mother was not, even though you would qualify your mother as being so. So I was saying ours, meaning mine and yours. And I said parents, because mine would be more on the father side and your would be more on the mother side. So I wasn't trying to insinuate that, I was just saying a general term. So we clarified that. And thank you for sharing about this process of healing with your daughter, and the importance of, and I imagine that when you took your daughter or set it up for your daughter to go see a counselor, I imagine that you had a very different conversation with your daughter, encouraging her to share whatever she needed to share about whatever was going on. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, I absolutely did. And I felt so empowered passing that to her. I felt so empowered to go, okay, my child's suffering. They don't know exactly what it is. Like, she couldn't put it into words why she was anxious or why she was depressed or why any of that was happening. And I couldn't get it from her, because she was kind of just she seemed not to be able to identify it. And I could put thoughts in her head, but that wouldn't have helped her. So, it's take her there. And I did. I encouraged her. And she made the statements to me, Mom, first of all, I think she was scared to go, and like something was wrong with her. And of course, I had to assure her that nothing is wrong with her, that we all as human beings need help. And anxiety and depression runs very much in all of us. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. If anything, you should feel proud that you're willing to go and explore what's going on with you, because that's the only way to heal it. You gotta feel it to heal it, right? And so I encouraged her to not. She tends to get kind of quiet and shy, and I encouraged her. I said, you're going to this to help yourself, and so you need to speak up and you need to share, so you can release it, because that's the only way. Caring. And I've also shared that I've harbored a lot of my actually all of my childhood stuff until most recently. And that's 50, I'm 52. So, well, I don't know what 5.5 years is, but until now, as an adult, with silver hair coming in, that I'm just now healing and releasing this stuff that's been with me all these years. And if a young one can learn anything from me or you or any of the elders, and that is the huge, please, let's clear it now, honey. Let's clear it. Let's get it on. And so you can live, and you don't have to live in this reactionary world and constantly reacting to the pains and stuff that you don't even know what's going on with you. Like, let's just clear it out and start. I mean, that's kind of what's a beautiful thing. I think the more and more I see of this is people talking like yourself. Thank you for doing what you're doing, talking about this lineage healing and this ancestral healing and clearing it, because we just carry so much. And so what was I going to say too? I talked to her also about drugs and alcohol. We talked about sex. We talk about all the things that were never talked to about, that I was never talked to about with my parents. And the topics range from serious to silly and all over the place and in between. And there are times, because we'll be having dinner and I sit down and I'll lay a format down to like, hey, what about this? Let's talk about it. And it might be uncomfortable for a minute, but now we both don't really feel uncomfortable about any of it. And it comes natural. And we even had a talk when, with her boyfriend, when he came around and started thinking about what sex looks like, and if they're not what it looks like, but if they're going to engage in it, and wait a second, let's talk about this, and at the dinner table, bring them over, come on, let's have dinner and we'll talk about it. And, awkward moments, but that turned into great moments and great awareness for both of them and for me too. And so I just feel more empowered. Obviously, since I stopped drinking, I feel more empowered than ever. But when I share those moments with my kid, and when she can come to me and tell me, Mom, and she's afraid of picking up alcohol and drugs right now. She's afraid that she might not have the gene that wants to stop, the aversion gene. Yeah. And for good reason. And I've shared with her, you may not, but you won't know until you start. And so I would encourage you just probably to shy away from it. I can't tell you what to do. I'm going to give you the tools that I have to inform you of what has happened in my life. And her father drinks, and too, so she's got it all the way around, and it's not just from her father and myself, it's from his family, and it's from my family, and so on and down the road, and who even knows how far back it really goes, because I've lost track with some of that lineage, but I believe that it probably goes pretty far. And so she kind of doesn't seem to want to, thank God for now. But if she, and I've shared this with her, if she ever does, and I hope she doesn't, but if she ever does try the alcohol or try the drugs in her life, I've also shown her a really good example of how you can always pick yourself back up again. And that no matter what you're hit with in this life, you never have to lay it down, that you can pick yourself back up. And even if you're at the lowest point in your life, that it is not over, because you too can recover from it. And I think there's strength in that. I don't love the things that I did in my past or didn't do as a result of being drunk around her, but I love the relationship we have now. And the fact that now, if I was still drinking, I wouldn't be having these talks. I wouldn't be, gosh, I can't even say what it would be like if I was still drinking. I'm just so thankful I'm not, because now I get to be 110 or 20 or 200% present in every way to try to give her the best of my ability and my knowledge to help her out in her life.
So inspirational. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing about all this. I just want to appreciate for a moment how, even though there was this potential for a great deal of distrust for your daughter to develop with you, that it seems like in witnessing you pulling yourself up from the bottom of that bathtub and making the commitment and being true to your word, even though there were all those times perhaps prior to that where you weren't, in witnessing the power of that decision and sticking to it these last number of years. It wasn't just that, it was also all of these other healthy relationship dynamics. Some of them may have already been in place even when you were drinking, but that probably very much improved in the last number of years with your daughter, that now it sounds like you have a kind of trust and openness with your daughter that many parents could only dream of with a young daughter who's, considering having sex or considering doing drugs and alcohol for the first time, and the fact that she's even talking with you about it and bringing her boyfriend over for dinner to have a conversation with you about it. That is like huge amounts of trust and rapport between a mom and a young daughter that many parents could only dream of having. So I just want to acknowledge and appreciate the potency of the ancestral healing. And I'll clarify that I call healing with our descendants, between us as parents and our descendants, to be part of the ancestral healing trajectory, right? Because, and I also want to acknowledge and appreciate how, so many parents come to me and say, how can I encourage my daughter's healing process? How can I support? How can they're coming to me because they see something going on with their daughter that they want to participate in a healing process, oftentimes around the womb, the menstrual cycle, something like that. And I always say, you have to do your own healing first and be an example and demonstrate what it means to heal this. Until you've done that, your daughter's not going to see the importance of it. She's not going to be able to understand why should she bother if you're not even doing it, right?
Amen.
So if you were still drinking and trying to tell your daughter you shouldn't drink, there would have no potency to that. And then to see your daughter developed a drinking problem, if you were still drinking and you're trying to pull her out of it, there would have nothing. You would have no strength to your words or your actions. But what you said is because she witnessed you pull yourself out of that bathtub. Okay, I'm speaking metaphorically about that because she wasn't in the bathroom with you. But I'm clear that I'm not confused about that.
I got it. Yes.
But she witnessed you pull yourself up from the floor of that moment, right? And keep growing from that moment and moving forward, and keep true to your word, even though she saw you stumble over that word so many times before. She witnessed that transformation in you. And what you just described of knowing that even if she gets herself into the bottom of a bathtub one day, she will have that experience in her being.
Yes.
That she witnessed you get out of that situation for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's become her inheritance. That's more valuable. I mean, that's like crucially valuable, is centrally valuable. I don't even have the words to say how valuable that is. So I just want to acknowledge and appreciate that whatever your recognition of taking self-responsibility and stepping into that, and the power and strength of that, and just give thanks to the divine beings, the angels, the higher self, whomever responded to that call that you put in. And it's my experience too that it's often when we're down on our knees crying out for a miracle, that's when miracles usually happen, right? When whatever was possible prior to that moment suddenly becomes possible. So I'm just celebrating that with you, celebrating this new lineage that you're passing down through, becoming that ancestor who made a shift in the trajectory of the lineage. And that ripples back through the lineage as well. And it sounds like perhaps, and we're running out of time here, maybe we'll do a part 2, but that, whatever we're doing in this lifetime ripples back through the lineage as far as healing for the spirits of those who are still living and those who have passed on, whether they're aware of it, conscious of it, willing to engage with it or not.
Yeah.
And that's one, with the ancestral healing thing that I've noticed, one thing that I've noticed is that, it can be very painful to see that, our parents who are still living, I can speak from my own personal experience. Sometimes I notice patterns that they're unable to get free of for whatever reason. And, it just, at a certain point, I just have to focus on my own healing process and trust that it will ripple back in the right timing for them. And it may be like with my grandmother, it wasn't until 2 hours before she passed that some of those patterns she became liberated from in a comatose state in the last couple of hours of her life, where as she passed, a great peace came over her. Who knows when that is supposed to be? Right. There's that. Everyone gets to that moment at the bottom of the bathtub where they have a conversation with their higher self and the change is able to occur.
Yes. Yes. Amen.
And we can't, get anyone else to get to that moment any sooner than they arrive there on their own. And it may be after they die and their spirit has to process that for a period of time, and we can support them in that realm too. So that's something that we can explore. It's sometimes easier to shift some of these patterns that are so biochemical, right? It's harder when we're in these biochemical bodies that keep firing the same neurons and we get these biochemical addictions to certain patterns and stuff. It can be very difficult to shift like this mass, right? Biological mass, right? And with the DNA that keeps creating the same cells and the same shapes. I mean, there are healing methods that we can address that with, but they take a lot of effort. Whereas once we're in the spirit realm, our spirit realm ancestors can often make huge shifts, especially when we call in the support of, the angels or the ancient wisdom ancestors or our own higher soul, or all these, energy healing things around ancestral healing. We can really support ancestors in the spirit realm to make huge shifts for the lineage as well. So I just wanted to mention that, and thank you for any work. Obviously, it obviously helped you to connect to the spirit realm in a powerful way. And like I say, we could go on and on about that for another hour, but maybe we'll do a part 2 about that. So thank you so much for sharing so openly, so genuinely, so tenderly about these challenging topics. I'm sure it's going to really support some listeners around these topics. So is there a way for folks to get in touch with you? I know you said you offer Reiki healing sessions and things like that. Can you share a little bit about that and how folks can get in touch with you if they want to engage with what you offer?
Sure. I do offer Reiki healing with crystals, with sound healing, with aromatherapy. And in the sessions that I offer, they are holding space for the individual. I'm channeling my angels of highest love and light and my ancestors, as well as my person that I would be doing Reiki on. And I call in their angels of highest love and light, their ancestors of highest love and light, and holding a session for them to be embraced by all of those beings. And immense healing can come from it. It's amazing the amount of relaxation and amount of de-stressing that can take place, and releasing, and sometimes releasing things that they didn't even know they had in them, all through Reiki session, all through, my hands, and but being channeled, I'm the conduit for that love and that light coming through. But so I can be reached. I am on Facebook. My Facebook page is Kimberly Donnelly, Reiki Master, or may say Reiki Healer. So Kimberly Donnelly, I think there's a tag also for Kimberly Donn, D-O-N-N, or Donnelly, D-O-N-N-E-L-L-Y. So that's where I can be reached.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your inspiring story of transformation and healing. I really appreciate it, Kimberly. And listeners know that this is one of a series of Ancestral Healing podcasts. So keep an ear out, keep an eye out for emails about upcoming episodes all the way through October 31st. Which is the beginning date of the Ancestral Healing month-long program that I'm offering. And it's an online program, which is also the beginning of a longer program, the Biomystical Womb Apprenticeship Program. So, and you can just do that first month if you're interested in ancestral healing. But if you then decide to join us for the rest of the program, it's a 13-month program, then that's also available. So this is sort of a preamble to introduce some of the topics, some of the healing processes that can happen in that ancestral healing month-long program. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com and look under the online courses tab to check out the Ancestral Healing course. You can also look at the Biomystical Womb Apprenticeship tab to check out that course as well, that 13-month apprenticeship. So those are the announcements about all of that. Thank you again, Kimberly, for joining us. That's all for now. Be well until next time. Take good care.
Thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.